Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to take a little break, a small detour from the grand finals to talk a bit about this recent news that has been coming out from teams releasing some players. There have also been some coaching moves that have happened, but I'm not going to talk about those. I'm going to save those for later videos when I'm talking about the teams in general and their moves and their roster changes. For now, I want to focus just on roster moves and players that are no longer in the Overwatch League, or at least no longer on the team that they were on this past season. So, there's two teams I want to talk about. So let's talk about the Boston Uprising and the Los Angeles Gladiators, two teams who have both made moves to release some players. Let's start with the Boston Uprising. Their moves were not as many. They only made 2 moves, as opposed to the Gladiators, who made 4, and the 4 that they made were pretty big. So the Boston Uprising announced yesterday that they have released Halo and Mikey from their team going into 2021. Now, this is not a surprise for me. These are 2 players who joined mid-season. Mikey especially joined kind of late in the season. Weird signing, to be completely honest with you. Nothing against Mikey as a player. His signing didn't make a ton of sense. Main tank was not really a need for this Uprising team, and they ultimately signed another main tank when they didn't really need one, when I thought they would have been better off signing another DPS player, but they made the decision to bring in Mikey, and he didn't really have much of an impact on this team because they never really gave him the opportunity to play because he was playing behind a very good main tank in Fusions. So that is something that is unfortunate to see. Halo joined after Swimmer's retirement, and Halo was pretty good for this team. Wasn't the best, but he was pretty good, but definitely a player who you could improve upon, and there are better options in that position. What's interesting is that they specifically, said, both players joined the Uprising amid a turbulent season and were thankful for their adaptability, resilience, and hard work along the way. There's obviously one other player that the Boston Uprising had signed during the season, and that was Punk, their flex tank. But Punk, at least for the time being, is not being released by this Uprising team. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if the Uprising are planning on trading a lot of players. That's kind of been a thing that the Uprising have seemingly done in the past. I don't know if they trade players for money considerations or if they will try to do player-for-player trades. I talked in my last roster discussion video when I talked about the London Spitfire potentially releasing their entire roster. I said in that video that there's a very good chance, I think, that the London Spitfire make a move to try to acquire Fusions. And when you look at this Uprising team right now, and the players that they have, you have Color Hex, Fusions, Myunbong, Jerry, Punk, and then you still have Axiom on this roster, though he's currently not with the team. He's been kind of in and out for different reasons. You have a possibility that they want to move towards a Korean roster, especially with the Korean head coach that they signed. Try to build around Myunbong and Jerry, possibly Axiom, and possibly some players from the London Spitfire. Maybe someone like Sanguinar, maybe Bernard, maybe Glister. Who knows what the Boston Uprising might try to do. It's interesting to look at, but what we do know and what we can say is that the Boston Uprising have gotten rid of a number of players going into 2021. Of course, Mikey and Halo, and I'm curious to see what is to come for this team in the future, because I think there is a ton of potential that this Boston Uprising team could have with Myunbong as a kind of centerpiece and with Jerry as a centerpiece. I'm curious to see what this roster opts to do for the future and how they plan on building a successful team in 2021 after 2019 and 2020 were both not good years for this Boston Uprising team. Now, let's talk about the LA Gladiators, because the LA Gladiators made a number of major moves. Now, 4 players have been released from this LA Gladiators roster. 2 of them not that surprising. Jaru and Bishu no longer on this Gladiators team. Jaru didn't get a ton of playtime. Once Kevster came into this roster, especially Jaru's playtime was essentially 0. He did not live up to the expectations I think a lot of people had for him, or that people may have had for him. He was definitely kind of came in as like the number 3 DPS already, and when Kevster started playing at a high level the way that he did, it became pretty clear that Jaru's spot on the team was unfortunately not going to be the best, and he definitely was not going to be able to kind of secure a spot when you had Kevster and Birdring both having incredible seasons, and Mirror being able to be super flexible and play heroes like your Zarya, and also play heroes like your Doomfist. So there just wasn't a lot of room for Jaru. Bishu, on the other hand, there's only so much you can do as a flex tank when Space is on your team. Space is just that good of a player. You can't really play a lot, or expect to play a lot, when you have Space on this team. I think Bishu's role on this team was probably more of a kind of managerial coaching type role, where he was probably more there to kind of help connect the Western players from the Korean players, or with the Korean players. So, Birdring and OG help them connect with the rest of the team. Plus, Bishu has been with this team before, so that helps. Just kind of, you already have that pre-existing synergy, so you already have a relationship in place there with Shaz and Big Goose, where you can kind of just keep building upon that relationship. But of course, Shaz and Big Goose are the big parts of this LA Gladiators roster that have been released. Both Shaz and Big Goose have been released from the Gladiators. Big Goose announced that he is retiring from the league. Shaz has said that he will take some time to consider what he will do, but all we know is that Shaz and Big Goose are both no longer with the LA Gladiators. The last remaining players from the original Gladiators roster are now gone. And it seems pretty clear, based on this, that the Gladiators have a plan to rebuild, specifically rebuild based on their current tank line. It's interesting that LH Cloudy has not been released. He's an interesting player to still see on this team. He got some playtime last season. I think to me, it's more likely that if he was going to get released, he would have been released already alongside Jaru, Bishu, Big Goose, and Shaz. Maybe not, maybe I'm wrong, maybe that isn't the way that things are working, but just in general, I think it's quite interesting that LH Cloudy is still on this team. But I think that this team wants to build around Space, OG, and Birdring primarily, and also Kevster. I think they were very impressed with Kevster. I was very impressed with Kevster this season. And I think if you're the Gladiators, you look and you say, we have 2 really good young tank players in Space and OG who are really good and who are star players. We have a DPS player who came out of Contenders and was incredible, playing on really high ping. So, Kevster could definitely be a really consistent and good DPS player for this team in the future. Birdring had a comeback season. So you just got to build now at this point a new support line. Who knows what type of support line they're going to do. DPay has talked in the past, of course, that he wants this to be a Western roster, and a roster that has a bunch of Western players, or a mixed roster. Not necessarily Western roster. He wants to be a mixed roster. And he wants players who want to play in a mixed roster. So I'll be interested to see what the future holds for this Gladiators roster. I'm not going to do a ton of speculation on types of players I think they could sign. There's a lot of support players out there. A lot of main supports, a lot of flex supports coming in and out of Contenders. There's tons of people in the Overwatch League who are going to be free agents. I mean, Halo's a free agent now. Like, if they really liked Halo, they could always go after Halo. There's tons of players that are possible signings for this team that they really could, realistically go after and bring them in. So it'll be interesting to see what this team does decide to do there. But I think it's sad to see Bishu, Big Goose, and Shaz gone from the league. Bishu said that he's going to look for coaching or managerial opportunities, which I think Bishu would be great at. I also would love to see Bishu be an analyst. I think that one of the biggest things that the NA production lacks is a Korean analyst. There is no Korean analyst. There is no player who can kind of give insight in terms of Korean players' thought processes and mentalities when they go into matches. As much as I love Bren and Sideshow and Reinforce and Custa and Zoe and Mr. X and everybody involved, none of them are players are personalities that have connections to the Korean players. None of them have really strong kind of bonds with them because there's a huge language barrier. So I think it'd be really interesting to have a player like Bishu or maybe even like Ark in the future be these players who can actually help kind of bridge the gap between the Western audience and the Korean audience by having a player or former player turned analyst who can really help bridge that gap. So I'd love to see Bishu in that role as well. But I think, like I said, a managerial or coaching role would also be very good for him. And I think that any of those are really, really, really good things for him to do. And I think he should have a role because his history in esports is long too. I believe he played League of Legends before he went to the Overwatch leagues. Like he's been around for a while, so it would be nice to see Bishu get some opportunities somewhere, wherever that may be. I think Bishu really deserves it. When it comes to Shaz and Big Goose, obviously, the Finnish support duo was great. By far, I think the best Western support line in the league. In probably ever that the league has seen. They were both really good, solid players who I really think stepped up as much as they could whenever they had to. I mean, they were in positions, especially Shaz. Like flex support has always been a weird position because it's always been super super dominated by Korean players, right? It's been a position where like really you have very few really good Western flex supports. I think Shaz was the best one. I think he performed at a high level pretty consistently, and I think that he was one of the few who was able to consistently be on a roster and be a performing player on that roster. So it is unfortunate to see him go. And I mean the personality of Big Goose was always great, and he's someone who you'll hate to see go, but like I said, he's a person who could definitely become an analyst, a streamer, something. I mean, Big Goose. I mean, he also might be the kind of guy to just retire and that's it, and just walk off into the sunset. Who knows? But I think it is. It's sad to see these players go, but I'm intrigued to see what the Gladiators do in the future. That's all for me, though. Let me know your thoughts on the moves by Boston and the LA Gladiators in the comments down below. Hope you are all staying safe and staying healthy. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing. But that is all for me. I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.